Is that too loud? Is it okay? It's all right? Okay. I was hearing some ringing feedback. I don't know if that's this or this. So at a certain point, they are to tell apart. Okay, we're continuing with chapter 10 in the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Bodhisattvas seeking clarification. Really important chapter. We're almost finished. I think we're on the last two sections here. But in the last couple of weeks, we've been going over a really important section of the text that kind of holds us all together, and it has to do with the Avatamsaka statement that basically all beings have this what's called awakened Buddha nature, and all beings can realize this Buddha nature. It's not the special ownership of a class or a caste or a culture or and even people, because this extends to all sentient creatures, however close or far away they might be from that. And one of the key things that emerges is a Manjushri Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva Great Wisdom, is asking, given that that's the case, that this is such a powerful human liberating opening of wisdom, and then most importantly of liberation from dukkha, suffering, in dissatisfaction. Why is it that it's so unevenly distributed? Why do some beings get to hear it and some beings don't? Why, even after they get to hear it, they don't actually put it into practice, or like come to a banquet and don't eat? Why is this? And basically, this comes down to the most fundamentals of the teaching. When, upon the Buddha's awakening, he says and declares, and part of that awakening is this statement, oh my gosh. He didn't say, oh my gosh, I'm just putting that in there, but all beings have this thing that I've just accomplished. All beings have this potential. And it's only because of confused thinking, muddled thinking, and grasping and attaching, those two things, that cause them not to fully realize what I've just fully realized. And so the whole of his teaching, at this point, some of you know the story, he hesitated to teach because he realized that although that sounds very simple, it's really, really hard for people to straighten out their thinking and also to break through of these grasping attachments, these fundamental cravings and afflictions. And so in the 49 plus year of his career, everything he taught was in one way or another going back to the heart of this. It may not go back directly sometimes, depending on the person he was teaching, but eventually it had to come back to that. It had to come back to the person, him or herself, because there was no giving of this awakening, no giving of this Buddhahood that could be transmitted from an individual to an individual, even from a Buddha to a living being. All the Buddha could do was map out this methodology or this method for others to take up. And that's why it says in the Dhammapada, no one can liberate you but yourself, no one can, no one may, you yourself must walk that path. Buddhas only show the way. So his whole teaching thing on one hand was limited properly so to what he could inspire, deliver, point to, set up a map for other people, but he could not literally be a savior. And in fact, that's not a word that's used in this tradition at all. So what we were dealing with here is what came up in this last passage of text, is that the thing that seems to stand mostly in the way are what called the klesha. In Pali, it's kalesha, Chinese fannao. And this is a list of very human psychological, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual attachments, confusion, graspings, twistings, knots, that actually impede that awakening the Buddha said was possible. And this is where it comes into, they're both in the area of muddled thinking, and they're in the area of the grasping and attaching. So if we map that out, those become the klesha. And then we spend some time going over that because it's such a fundamental principle, and yet we just gloss over it and sometimes even recite it like it's a mantra. You know, afflictions are endless, I vow to sever them all. Okay, we just go on. And so we mentioned that. I'll just go through some of these just to point them out. I'm not going to go into details. We did that already, and I'm sure you all forgot, but that's okay. If you forget the list of afflictions, that's okay. But don't forget to lose your own. You know, you can lose the list, but don't forget to lose your own, because then the whole point of the list is to use it as a mirror to see inventory. Where do I come out on here? How's my greed, anger, ignorance, pride, wrong views, or doubt? These are the first six major. And then you have these minor ones: wrath, enmity, hypocrisy, contention or fighting, jealousy, stinginess, trickery and flattery, deceit, arrogance and conceit, and then vihimsa, causing harm. And this applies to the three dimensions of causing harms. It doesn't just mean causing harm to others, people. It means causing harms to other living creatures. And it doesn't just mean causing harm to yourself, which it does, but it also includes harming the natural world. So on the psychological or personal, on the social, family, friends, and other creatures, and on the natural world, even plants and animals and the oceans and the sky, all are considered into the realm of not harming. And so if you want to use it this way, your exploitative and harming footprint, you want to really reduce. Then there was other ones like lethargy, frivolity and restlessness, an unhealthy disbelief, sloth, and I like that, sloth, a very good Anglo-Saxon word. It's a kind of spiritual laziness. No, it's not talking about you don't have energy to make good investments with your money or something. This is talking about spiritual laziness. You can be very active and energetic in a worldly way, but you can still be slothful and lazy in the spiritual. So this is very interesting contrast. Forgetfulness, and this means, not paying attention. And that goes into the idea of the last two, distraction, and a critical one, non-discernment. Not seeing things clearly with a judicious, balanced view. And this can talk about all kinds of things, but you just fall into things that you should have or could have, or maybe in a slight way knew were off, and you still did it. You didn't use discernment. The other last two are called shamelessness and lack of modesty. And these are considered, a sense of shame is considered we think of it as something I want to go to the psychologist for and get rid of because I'm feeling ashamed. But in this sense, it has to do with conscience. And it has to do with a kind of moral sensibility that when you're about to, or you're engaged in, or have just done something that really goes beyond the bounds of what it means to be a good person, something triggers in you. You're either aware of it before and you hesitate, or while you're doing it, you have this stirring of conscience, I shouldn't be, or if you get down the road past those two and you do it afterwards, just, I shouldn't have. But any one of those, if you lose that compass, you're really, really at a disadvantage. And this is why, again, if you understand, in this system of saving yourself, sort of use that language, liberating yourself and putting the work on you and the potential on you, so you have this incredible freedom to become Buddha, but also this incredible responsibility for not. And so the freedom and the responsibility go hand in hand. Without the sense of shame and remorse, without the conscience, you lose your compass. You have no way to then determine or assess whether I'm moving in the right direction or not. So this is a very important quality. Maybe some night I will spend just on one sutta that I really love, devoted to this, and it's when the Buddha teaches his son, Rahula, I think Rahula is 7 years old at the time, and teaches him about the importance of that compass of conscience. And he basically says, any sage, anyone that ever got to be a arhat or a bodhisattva or a Buddha, had to not only have this compass, but refine it. And refine it and refine it till it was so sensitive as, and the metaphor of the text is, as an elephant's trunk. Now, some of you are going, huh? sensitive. Elephants aren't sensitive, they just clobber around. But then says the trunk of an elephant is exquisitely sensitive, far more sensitive than most capacities humans have, even dogs and other animals. The last one I read about the trunk is they have 1,000 plus little hairs on the trunk of an elephant. And these are both chemical and vibration receptors. And so with those hairs, they can literally hear and see when their ears and eyes aren't quite working. Now we have a few in our nostril, right? We have a few little hairs and we cut them out, but we got them back there, they're working. But compared to 1,000, not only are they hairs, but they're like Swiss cheese. In other words, they have holes going through them, so they pick up things moving through those hairs. They're just discovering this now. The sense, and of course, the Buddha knew this, and Rahula, as a 7-year-old living in a world of elephants, unlike anybody in Berkeley now, well, maybe you are, Discovery Channel, but that doesn't count. It's got to be the real thing, would understand what the Buddha was talking about there. And the Buddha says to Rahula, don't lose your trunk. You lose your trunk, you're in deep trouble for this cultivation. So this goes back to then these afflictions, these kleshas, where all the work is supposed to take place. All the metaphysical, if you want to use metaphysical as the insights, all the great wisdom insights, all the awakening, including the penetrations and spiritual psychic powers and all of that, only come from this. As this is cleansed and perfected, those occur naturally. They're not something you can seek or pray for or hope for or ask for some magic talisman to get. These are the things that come from the natural releasing of the murky thoughts and the attachments. And the more you cast off, the more this naturally, the text says, arises in me. We were just reading this text last week when the Buddha was talking about cultivating the Eightfold Path. And he said, when I cultivated the Eightfold Path on my own, suddenly it arose within me, insight, understanding, calm, and wisdom, and so forth. It arose within me. It didn't come from without. It wasn't something I got. It just, like the sun rising in the morning, it just came up naturally. So this is a really important, I guess, getting the dynamics of how this works, which is why when you do the cultivation, you really pay attention to your area of mindfulness regarding these afflictions, and you don't worry about results. If the work is done on that ground, results will happen naturally, even if you don't want them to. But if you bypass working on these things with the hope of some side, delivery or magical response, nothing's going to happen. Or you're just going to get more afflicted because you're not getting what you seek, which, by the way, is one of the 8 sufferings. Have you heard about Dukkha? Anybody heard about Dukkha? The translation in English is often suffering, but there's actually 8 kinds of dukkha. I'm digressing a little, but I want to make sure when you talk, because people thought, okay, I actually met a Buddhist scholar, I'm not going to say who, it's not too long ago, and he said, well, Buddhism has to be changed for the modern world, especially America and Europe. I said, why? Well, there's some very standard things here. We have the 4 ennobling truths and the Eightfold Path, and that's pretty much across all Buddhist traditions. That's one of the basic things. He said, well, there's a problem with the first of the ennobling truth, which is dukkha. It's called D-U-K-K-H-A if you want to look it up. And it's translated in English as suffering. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the lifestyle and the standard of living in Europe and America is so high and refined, there's no suffering. Now, I mean, you're laughing, but I'm saying this was a recognized Buddhist scholar. I'm going, whoa. So what the Buddha meant by suffering, he says, birth itself can be, and often is, a very painful experience, both for the mother, but also for the child, assuming everything goes right, which in a lot of cases it doesn't. But even so, it's a lot of difficulty and sweat and toil and suffering. Birth, aging. Now, you can't nod your head, you're too young. You don't know that one yet. I've heard about it. I heard that people age, but not me. But, after about 30, 40, 50, I don't know, whenever your roots start to wither a little bit, your hair turns gray, a couple fall out, the dentist says, I'm sorry, we're going to have to, knock that. A lot of those stairs are getting taller. It's really, I'm getting out of breath going up those stairs. And anyhow, aging. And then there's all the kinds of illnesses and maladies that come with the decline of the body and finally dying and death. Those are the four basic. Then the Buddha said there's also the suffering of not being close to what you love. Now this can be a country, it could be a people, it could be a family, it could be a person, it could be a relationship. Being apart from that which matters to you love. I love nature, I love the wilderness, and I'm stuck in a condo in New York, okay? Or I love condos in New York and I'm stuck in the boonies. Whatever it is, but you're separated from that which you love. And then the corresponding one is being close to that which you don't like. So could be people, your job. It could be a situation in a marriage, a family, a clan that you are moving into, and you do not want to be there, and yet you can't get away. A lot of modern anxiety has to do with these two, and the third one too. But the first one is not being close to what we want, and if you look at just that on a large scale now with migration and immigration and people who are displaced, that's a widespread form of suffering now. Not maybe for people here, but for a lot of people in the world. Or the fear that that's going to happen, that I will be taken away from that which matters and what I love. So whether you have the actual suffering of that or the anticipation and fear of it coming, both produce this anxiety, this dukkha. And the third one is never getting what you seek. That would be the seventh. So separated from what I love, close to what I don't, and then never getting what I want. Never, I want this, I crave this, whether it's good a relationship or a job. You name it. This constant itching, seeking that is at the heart of human suffering. And the Buddha pointed to. That's why often the dukkha gets translated not as suffering, but as dissatisfaction or unsatisfactory, or a kind of angst, or a kind of sense of displacement or alienation. You can use all different words. Unfortunately, we just have dukkha in Sanskrit. But when we render to English just as suffering, it doesn't anywhere cover this. And you could see in there, it didn't say anything about standard of living. So you could see somebody with a very, very high standard of living and still subject to all of these kinds of sufferings. Maybe more rather than less. Because there's another suffering I invented. I didn't invent it, I think I describe it. Not as a suffering of not getting what you want, but the suffering of getting what you want. So getting what you want can be a kind of suffering. One, because as soon as you get it, you realize it's impermanent and passing, you can't hang on to it, or new models come out, or you got the beta version, or you got a second-hand one. So that suffering is, and then you can't keep it because it's slipping away. And then there's a deeper part of that, I would say, that's really associated with the modern, which is we have access to so many things that we want and can get now, and yet every one of them in the end turns out to be rather empty and worthless. It doesn't satisfy. So not getting what we want is sort of an empty feeling, but correspondingly getting what we want and acquiring it and adding it and having these wonderful acquisitions also can lead to a profound sense of suffering. And maybe even deeper than the other, because the one that not getting what I want still has some hope to it. But not getting what you want and not being satisfied with it is like, okay, then what do I do? It's just this bottomless pit and I can't fill it. And the last one just has to do, it's called the raging blaze of the five skandhas, and that just means the general processes of body and mind constantly changing and eventually falling apart. So I just go into this a little bit because as we get into these terms, it's very easy to say, oh, the Buddha said life sucks, existence is suffering. And in fact, that's not what this is saying. What the Buddha is saying here is the unawakened life is a form of dissatisfaction and suffering. He doesn't say life itself is dissatisfactory and suffering. So it's, you got to work with it. You have a wonderful potential with this thing called life to become a sage or a Buddha. And conversely, unattended, neglected, it just pitters away and doesn't amount to anything. But it all depends. So this is sort of like what we call interdepending, co-arising. Anyhow, so where does that lead me? I digress and then I forget. I have a sip of tea. Thank you. I appreciate this because it's warm and I'm overcoming a sickness that's affected my lungs. And you may have guessed by tonight my brain too, but I hope you don't notice that. Anyway, this helps ease it. Let me just say first of all, these afflictions, this klesha, which is called fan now, they're recited every day at most of the monasteries. Where they get recited, do you know? In the 4 vows on the Bodhisattva. In the morning ceremony or off in the evening, or you have refuge ceremonies or whatnot. You have living beings are boundless. I vow to liberate them all, cross them over. Fan now, I think Wuliang, endless. I vow, Shuryen, Duan. And the Duan Chinese literally means cut off, but I'll come to this. The doors of Dharma, the Dharma teachings are also limitless. I vow to study them all. And the path, the Buddha path, I vow to attain, even though it seems far away. Those are the 4 pratidhamma, adana of the Bodhisattva. And so the second one is really important because if living beings are boundless, I vow to liberate them all. That can only be done if the second one's accomplished, that the afflictions, the impediments to doing this are cut off. And then you have the Dharma doors are without limit. I vow to study Buddha. This is actually a Mahayana repeat of the 4 ennobling truths. The state of living beings is a state of dukkha. Is a state of, how would you put it? The unenlightened sphere. The afflictions are the suffering. The Dharma doors is the Eightfold Path, and Buddhahood is the ending of that. So you can see how these work in different versions of the same idea. But let me deal with that Duan. Now you remember last week I read to you this, the passage. What was the passage? Let's see if I can find that. Do you remember I was talking to you last week about this wonderful text, and I encourage you could find it on a PDF online, but it's the biography of Ajahn Mun, the individual who died in 1949 and brought back, largely was almost by himself and his own teacher, brought back the Thai forest tradition of wandering monks, ascetic practices, and so forth, close to the time of the Buddha. In any event, when he talked about what he was doing, and I want to emphasize this, Buddhism is about a doing. It's not just about a believing or devotion, but it's an actual doing. It's something you do. And he said, and I'm quoting, everything he did was directed towards this ignoble effort. And then he called destroying the kleshas within himself, destroying the afflictions within himself. And he said he had to be totally diligent and mindful, because if he gave an inch to one of them, the habit energy of them would take over again, the laziness, the greed, the jealousy. And so his mindfulness wasn't just mindfulness of the Buddha, but was mindfulness of catching these things as they arose in his consciousness at the deep mind ground level, which is why the quiet woods and meditation he found to be useful, because the distractions of the world kind of mute the trunk. It doesn't seem to pick up the receptivity as much. But you've all noticed this in the early hours of the morning, when you wake up at night or something, suddenly there's noise and clarity coming from the consciousness that can be easily covered over by a couple swipes of the phone or online or reading something or getting on with your busy life. And so in that silence, he wasn't using the silence to escape from the world. He is using the silence to deeply listen to and observe the workings of his own mind. And there he said he was paying attention not to the wonderful altered states of consciousness that came, but rather to these klesha that arose and trying to get rid of it. In fact, he said one of the things that happened when he was cultivating, altered states of mind did come up. He had some psychic powers that came up. He could travel to the different realms, not just the human, but he could go to the realms of the devas and the hells and everything. And he said, it was really far out. I was spiritually sightseeing. It was like being in, the Costco of spiritual states. I just go down every aisle and row, and it was really fun. And he said, but finally I realized this is just another distraction. Avoiding facing my own klesha and so he pulled back from that and started to really, at this point in his cultivation, observe his own mind. And then he said, finally he got to a point where he could see them, he could catch them, and sometimes even eliminate them, or get them so quickly that they didn't arise and create any static. And then he said at that point, he gained a kind of contentment that was beyond any other contentment he could imagine, and an ease, a relaxation. And then he said, only when I got that could I be of any help to anybody else. People wanted me to be a teacher, but before that, I could not be a teacher. I would just be talking talk, but I wouldn't be talking what I walked. And not talking what I walked is not teaching. So then he said this, he says, once that state is reached, it's correct to say that the heart mind itself is Dharma. And Dharma is the heart mind. There is nothing outside of that. So what I'm saying is, I'm emphasizing this. My own teacher put it down to a simple phrase. He would say this over and over again. I didn't tell you how many times I heard this when we were studying him. He'd say, Fojiao, the Buddhist teaching, Joshu, is only cultivate Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, precepts, samadhi, and wisdom, and put to rest your greed, your hatred, and your foolish stupidity. And we all go, yeah, okay. You hear it the first time, and kind of like, wow, it's pretty simple. After he would say it over and over again, you're just like, in one ear and out the other, without realizing, wow, this is actually the transmission of the Buddhist mind. People say, what's the transmission of the Buddhist mind? I'm going to see magical wisdoms or things like that. The Buddhist mind transmission is just this. You and you alone can do this work of cultivating precepts, samadhi, and your own insight. And only by doing that, getting rid of, and what are the getting rid of? Klesha, greed, anger, and stupidity. Those are the three major klesha. So it's like, how central is this? Very central. I won't tell you, there's a one, well, I will tell you, I digress, it's fun. Oh, we got time tonight, don't we? Okay. That's also turbidity. If nothing you do here on a Friday night, come in about, what is it, we start at 7:30, and look at nothing, no clock, no calendar, and just let the time go. Because most of the time, we're held by time, right? I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye, I'm late. And what's the important date? I don't know. I'm seeking, but I never find it. Anyhow, it's Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know them. You read Alice in Wonderland? You've read Alice in Wonderland. You wrote it? You watched it? The Victorian version? I didn't know they had that then. I'm joking. Of course. Read the book. Painful. I won't even bother to push reading anymore. Never mind. I pull back. So the story was there was this very highly educated scholar who was really interested in Buddhism, and he wanted to go to the high masters and get the essence of prajna, of wisdom, and what it was all about. And so basically he heard that in a faraway part of China, there was this eminent monk who had attained a high level of awakening and was really special. And he said, and so he put all his books aside. He sold a lot of his property to get the money together to go far, far, far away to find this monk. And it turns out the story is the monk lived in a tree. So he was living high up in the boughs of a tree, sort of like the tree sitters up in Oregon or something, you know. And he had a little tree house up there, and this scholar comes and he climbs up the ladder and he said, I've come all this way, great master. Please teach me the essence and the heart of this great wisdom tradition called Buddhism. And the monk looks at him and says, oh, simply cultivate greed, precept, samadhi, and wisdom, and put aside your greed, anger, and stupidity. And the guy goes, what? That's it? He said, I read all the classics, the books I've memorized, I've written books myself, I came all this way, and you're telling me something even a little kid would understand. And the monk said to him, that's true. Even a child understands it, but an elevated old person like you can't do it, can you? Boom. And he had a moment of awakening there. Wow. And realized that it wasn't a formula to memorize. It was actually something to be done. Anyhow, this idea then is extremely important. When this state is reached that Ajahn Mun was talking about, and when it's reached in the first stages of what you mentioned last week about the Arhat and the stream winner and so forth, the various stages of Arhat, this state is called Anashrava. And it's the most important marker that you can use and is used by teachers to determine your state of cultivation. And Anashrava simply means non-affliction, non-outflowing. So this list that I just went through, when that list of the greed, the anger, and so on and so forth is diminished and gone, that is a marker of whether your practice is right on or not. It's not about whether you see special things or hear special voices or have visions or even develop psychic powers. All of that is incidental to this. So the marker of this is an ashra. And that is what's meant in Buddhism by purity. We use the word purity, and it's often used in a sort of moralistic way. But actually what it means is your faculties are no longer tainted by greed, anger, and stupidity. That's what it means. And so this is called thoroughly purified. And the Buddha said when that happens, you become noble. So the Four Noble Truths are not the truths aren't noble at all. Doing them ennobles one. So the truths are ennobling truths. And when you take these practices on, you become unsullied, clear, free of these afflictions, and that is what purity. And when there's purity, then there's stillness, and everything starts to come back from that. So couple more points tonight. I hope you can, I'm getting totally bored on this because it seems, I can't, anyway, I'll go. Huineng, the great sixth patriarch, really goes into this in detail in what is called the Platform Sutra. Again, those of you who want to do some study on your own, pick up a copy of this. We have a new translation out with some introductory and footnotes. It's really accessible. Really accessible. Start reading like Ajahn Mun's biography. It's called The Biography of Acharya Mun. You can get a PDF. There's no movie, I'm sorry. You can also read the Platform Sutra. Read. There's no movie, I'm sorry. Maybe you can make a movie after you attain Anashravas. But don't try to before that, otherwise you'd just be selling schlep. Anyhow, in the Platform Sutra, Huineng says, all of you listen carefully. In the future, if there are people who are lost and confused, and they can recognize living beings, they will find Buddha nature, their Buddha nature. If they don't know living beings, then they could seek for the Buddha throughout endless aeons and never meet him. I'm now teaching you, and this is the line, recognize the living beings of your own mind and heart. He's not talking about sentient beings out there. He's saying the living beings of your own mind and heart. The Buddha nature is found right within your mind, your own mind. If you wish to see, encounter a Buddha, simply come to know these living beings of your own mind and heart. For it is these living beings who have lost sight of the Buddha, not the Buddha who has lost sight of living beings. Then he says, when you're awakened, your essential nature, your true nature, is being Buddha. And confused, your essential nature is just a living being. And he goes, sometimes does this. How fast can that happen? Boom, boom. Living being, Buddha. Awakened, confused. One thought, one emotion unchecked, one bad habit just let go. Then he says, if your essential nature is centered and balanced, then the living being is a Buddha. And when you go off course, when you lose this balance, the compass, the conscience, the steering mechanism, Buddha becomes living being. Again, it's not like it's one or the other. They're in a sense interchangeable and non-dual. They're along a continuum of possibility. Then he says, if your mind is devious and crooked, the Buddha is concealed within the living being. But one thought, balanced and true, the living being becomes a Buddha. Our own mind itself holds a Buddha, and this inherent Buddha is real Buddha. If our mind did not have its inherent Buddha, where would you find a Buddha? Where would you go to seek it? Never doubt this. There's nothing that can be established outside of this heart-mind of you, of mine. And when this heart-mind is fully cultivated, it's the same as what Ajahn Mun was saying. This is Dharma, this is Buddha, this is the universal. It's not two things at that point. And sometimes they use the expression that ice melts back into water, and the water is universal. Now, go on to this. Why am I bringing this up? Because he said living beings. He was stressing living beings. Here's a line from his text. He says, good and wise friends, all of you just said now, because he's giving a ceremony on the text. All these people come, they want to learn from him, and he transmits what are called the three refuges. When you officially become a Buddhist in your transformation process, there's a ceremony, and you take refuge with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and then sometimes you then take the 5 precepts and so forth. And he said, but when that happens, these 4 vows are given. Living beings are boundless. I vow to help liberate them all. Fanao, Wuliang, Shurian, afflictions are endless. I vow to get. So he says, all of you have come and you vowed, and he says, to get rid of the limitless living beings of my own mind. Wait a minute. He just added a phrase here. He says, what? He says, because, what does that mean? I vow to liberate the limitless living beings of my own mind. What does it mean? It means not me, Hui Nang, must liberate them. Good and wise friends, the living beings within your own mind are, anyone jump in? Are what? The living beings of your own mind are, now you don't think like microscopic little entities floating around. What are the living beings that he's talking about? And don't look it up in the text. What? Wisdom? Potentially. Remember, living beings are frozen Buddhas. Okay? They have to be melted and transformed into Buddhas. So he says, confused and off-center, it's just a living being. Awakened and true and centered, it's Buddha. Back and forth. So if you're going to cross over the living beings, he says they're just the deluded thoughts, the deceitful thoughts, the untrue thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, jealous thoughts, malicious thoughts. What he's doing is saying the afflictions are the living beings of your own mind. And you need to, in all mental states like these, he says, are the living beings. Each must be liberated within your own person, within your own nature. This is true liberation. So this is why this passage is so important. The affliction passage is so important, because what he's saying is, I'm not talking about you going out as a missionary and saving people. I'm talking about you crossing over the living beings of your own mind and heart. And by doing that, even if you don't want to, you will become Buddha. Because the line is, when that human potential perfects itself, cleanses itself, gets straight and right on, Buddhahood happens by itself. It's not something that's thought. And then he says this is meant liberating yourself. The thing I want to stress about this is two things. And this is from my own experience and with my own teachers, this is fun. I'm trying to say that this is immensely creative fun. It's a joyful undertaking. It's just like learning an art of a new instrument or painting or working with clay or something like that. Suddenly, the raw stuff of Buddha and sages, you realize has been dropped on your doorstep. It's within your own skin. It's your own person. You're going, whoa, but what do I do with it? And then you got these texts that tell you actually how to carve and craft and polish and refine it and turn it. It's like, this is immensely creative. It's very joyful. It's not penance and dirty work. It's creatively engaging. I would say from my own experience, difficult as it is, it's not as hard as neglecting it. So this might seem difficult, but not paying attention to this is far more difficult. That's why in the what is it, at the Tao Te Ching, there's this line that says, many difficulties in the end, great ease. Many little difficulties confronted, in the end, great ease. Many little difficulties ignored, in the end, great suffering. So it's like these little things you take on one by one, whatever that klesha you want to work on. You just take it on, you start working on the anger, the temper, the hatred, the jealousy, the competitiveness, the self-flagellation, and so forth. And it's not even duty, and it's not renunciation. This is all off. This portrayal of Buddhists as renunciation, giving up the pleasures and so forth. If somebody is coming out of a prison gang in chains, and someone goes in and cuts those chains, you say, oh, they're renunciants. No, they're not renunciating. They're liberating. They're casting off the things that constrain them. This is what this is. That's why it's called the path of liberation. And actually, the precepts in the Bodhisattva precepts are called pratimoksha. Moksha is the Sanskrit word for liberation. Prati is the code. It's the path of liberation. The precepts are pratimoksha, the liberating. They're not repressive morality. They're actually freeing up. So I'm just trying to share this with you. It's like I get bored really easily. I always have. But I've never been bored with this work. Really. And it just gets, as Alice says, curiouser and curiouser, more interesting as you go into it. And it's the other thing about it, it's not a distraction. This is not some game. It's real. This is real stuff. This is really the art of becoming a person. Or whether you're Buddhist or not, it doesn't matter. It's just like, how can I be the best possible person I can? You work on these areas. And this is what it means when they say chung, the second tone, chung, guo, accomplish the fruit. What this means is you've succeeded, you've become, chung means to turn into something. You have transformed yourself into somebody else. And in the process of being, you develop the fuller possibilities of the human. I'll just close with one little bit tonight is on this, and having to learn the hard way how to not only interpret this, because I'm doing interpretation tonight based on my teachers teaching to me and my own experiences, reading the text, and trying to some way bring them into the existential alive rather than as religious dogma or doctrine or something that's kind of foggy and oppressive or difficult, that this is really joyful, like it's leading a meaningful life in the best sense. Part of that had to do with understanding, but translation is critical here. For example, I'll give you beginning, when I first came, I spoke absolutely no Chinese. And my teacher, Master Hua, spoke very little English. So mostly our way of communicating was in dreams. But when it came down to talking to him, he would say something, I'd say, what did he say? And I'd say something, he'd say, Ta shuo shama. What did he say? And Heng Sure translated between us. He was the interlocutor. So sometimes when we were translating or talking or lecturing, his English got better. I don't know that my Chinese got better. But one time I was working on this vow, afflictions are endless, I vowed a duan, cut them off. And we were translating the 4 great vows of the Bodhisattva. And the master listened and he said, what's the meaning of that cut off language? What does that mean? And I said, well, master, it's like sever, like a knife, to cut it off. And he wrinkled up his face and says, no. What? That's what the dictionary says. No, don't care about the dictionary. You don't cut it off. He says, if you cut off afflictions, you cut off bodhi. Because in the text it says, the afflictions are just bodhi, fan nao joshir puti. So the ice and water thing I was telling you about, this is the living being is the affliction. You don't cut them off. You teach and transform and bring them across. Oh. So we had a narrow dictionary definition of duan, and clearly got maybe the letter, but totally missed the spirit. And more importantly, now that I reflect back, we missed the psychological and emotional affect or impact that word choice would have on people trying to cultivate. Because if you say cut it off, you're into the sort of repressive boot camp approach. As if, and even Freud knew this, you don't repress these things. Because if you repress them, he called the return of the repressed, they come back in weird forms. If you cover this stuff over, it twists your personality, your habits, you become secretive, you become manipulative, and you're lying and deceptive all the time because you've repressed this, you haven't cleansed it, and you get very, very uptight. So, in a sense, our translation of cut it off would be harsh, repressive, denial, fighting with oneself, and it would have the opposite impact a person that was trying to pick it up on that basis of what they would do. Then, in looking into it more, and I'm still working on, we always work on things like this, but actually part of one of the original meanings for duan is to interrupt the flow. It's to step in between. So the flow would be you have a habit, and you momentarily interrupt the flow of that with something else. And by that momentary stopping, interrupting the flow, you break its hold on you for a minute. So that's why they say sometimes in meditation, when something comes up, don't repress it and don't indulge it, but just merely stop and observe it. And by stopping and observing that middle stage, you can almost defang it or put it into neutral for a little while, catch it, and move on. So it has to do with interrupting the flow. And then Master Shu Yun said meditation techniques, meditation mantras, and what do they call meditation subjects or topics? All of these are nothing more than interrupting the flow. You're using one thing that has no meaning to it whatsoever, reciting something, and you're interrupting the flow of your discursive thinking. And in that interruption momentarily, some light can start come. When the light comes heat. When the heat comes, melt the ice. Okay, so you get the metaphor here. So I really like that. I just discovered recently too that it also has another meaning, and it has to do with you sometimes with weaning, as if weaning a baby. And I really like that metaphor, because weaning means getting accustomed to managing without something on which you become dependent and become excessively fond. So when you wean a baby, you don't cut it off, and stop it. You reduce it. I think in medicine there's something called titrate. They use titration. In other words, if you're on a dose of something, you don't just stop it, you reduce it gradually. You wean yourself off so that you can not have shock to your system. So I think, I just stopped there with that example. The challenge for us has always been not only to try to understand it through our teachers' teachings and our own practice, but then to try to render this in language that conveys the therapeutic thrust of this, the liberating effect, as opposed to cutting it off. Just makes you sound like sack and cloth and self-flagellation and a very unhappy, repressed thing. Whereas this is really talking about creatively liberating yourself from bonds and afflictions and whatnot. So I'll stop there for tonight. You didn't even get to open the text, but if you looked at the text while I was talking, you probably got something probably better than what I would give you. But next week, we'll definitely go to the text, because what I want to do in the text, the next section of text, is Manjushri asking, why does a Buddha just teach one simple thing? Why does he teach all these various teachings? And it really has to do with addressing all these various afflictions. For each affliction, a teaching is given to counter it. And this is where the text is going, but I wanted to frame it this week to that, and then this would make more sense when we go back into the text next week. Okay, you are liberated for tonight. Anything you needed to bring up, or simple questions that we could talk about? Normally in class, some of you I see are new, haven't been here, we'd sit for 45 minutes from 7:30 to 8:15, and then we look into the text together. And the sitting has to do with preparing the mind and the heart to hear this in a different way than just dropping off bar to your car, listening to NPR or something, the radio bounce in, or whatever you listen to. It's to create an interruption. It creates a momentary interruption of noise and busyness, and in that interruption, when the text comes, it falls on fresh mind, fresh ears. So that's why we do the meditation before. Normally, every semester, we'd have a little instruction how to do that meditation, but since mostly everybody here has been through that a couple times, I don't do that anymore, but I think it is online someplace. So if you want to know about that more, the meditation before, I think Locke could give you a link to the couple lectures we had about that. And we will just keep going on with this Avatamsaka. We're on chapter 10. Altogether, there are dosha, how many? 40 chapters. And I don't know that I got 40 lifespans left to do this. So but if we go too fast, it's a Chinese expression, you're just riding on a horse looking at the flowers. It's just, and you never stop to examine any of them. All that's left is a blur of colors. We have to savor these a little bit, spend some time on them. Okay, so that's it for tonight. The monks are not here for tonight. I think Redwood Vihara is having a little meditation retreat. Anybody know? We have a couple of places that are active. One is the City of 10,000 Buddhas in Ukiah. This one is the Dharmaram Buddhist University, which is located up there. MA and undergraduate MA programs. We have schools. Down in the Santa Cruz Mountains area near Boulder, we have a Vihara redwood, a couple hundred acres. And right now, there's weekend. That's why Jin Chuan and Jin Wei aren't here. And then, of course, we have places all over the world. Heng Sure will lecture tomorrow night from Spiderland. Darwinian Nightmare, Australia. Really, every time I talk and we FaceTime a lot because we're working on a project together, I can't get to the text immediately. I have to look at one of his spiders, many of which are bigger than my hand. Oh yeah, no. And then, look at the python that just came on the porch. I just got a thing about snakes, so there's the python. And then all these birds that are coming, these exotic birds that he feeds. So the first 10 minutes of our talk is almost like the zoo. And then we finally get to the text. And he says, you got to come here. He says, there's nothing you've shown me that wants me to go there. Yeah, he said that one of those pythons got under my bed. I said, good. Tell me more, because I am not going there. But anyways, that's another place we have. It's Australia. We have places in San Jose, in Canada, up in Oregon, Washington, and different parts of Asia. So all similar things going on in all those places. So here we do this. Ken, is there any announcements for tonight? Okay. I guess we have a couple retreats coming up that you'll hear about soon. One will be usually at the end of the semester. In the early part of the summer, we have a retreat at the Sudana Center, which is one of our satellite campuses in Ukiah. And then we'll have maybe a Buddha Root Farm retreat this summer up in the woods of Oregon. and some other events. So if you want to get on the mailing list, I talked to Locke or Ken. Ken, raise your hand so they know you're nodding. That's Ken. She is our jack of... Say that again? I hope you all heard that. No, well, part of what's happening with this illness I have, I lost hearing. Tongue and smell have started to come back, and I'm not quite sure that's a gain or a loss, but anyhow, they've come back. But it's still, the hearing's just gradually coming. So you said something about Ben? Bhikkhu Bodhi. Oh, Bhikkhu Bodhi's coming. Oh, and will be the commencement speaker at our graduation. And for the 50th anniversary of DRBU. So the university was started 50 years ago. Actually, and I came 50 years ago. Wow, that's interesting. University's doing better than me. What's that? It's my anniversary? No, I don't think so. A university, you can get wisdom and compassion. You're only going to get gray hair from this anniversary here. So, but it goes to the point, because I was thinking about that. I thought 50 years. Wow. I mean, like some people get married for 50 years, and they have is it a silver or golden? I forget which. Golden. But 50, like, wow, it's just gone so fast, and I'm still just getting on a roll, It's like, it's been nothing. So maybe that being said, I'll get another 50. But then it's seeking, which you will never get. So I'm setting myself up for more dukkha. In any event, one of the things we do is to transfer idea of dedicating tonight's good energy to go back out into the world and maybe help things out a bit, which is sorely needed. So you'll have an English copy of those who don't know, and we do the chant together. We transfer the goodness of tonight's gathering. And we'll do that now in English. If you need a copy of the text, somebody can hand it from the back. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.